She married a paralyzed billionaire for the money, believing he'd never walk again, or uncover her secret. But the day he stood, unshaken and staring straight into her soul, she realized the real betrayal wasn't his. Because what he revealed next wasn't just about his legs, it was about who sent her to him. Before we dive into this unforgettable journey, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? If stories about love, sacrifice, and second chances speak to your heart, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we're bringing you another powerful story you won't want to miss. The bills kept stacking like bricks on her chest, each envelope a reminder of her drowning world. Mara Whitman sat alone on the hospital bench, her scrub top stained from a double shift, fingers trembling over the latest notice, final warning in bold red ink. Her younger brother Liam's rare condition demanded weekly treatments. She had sold her car, emptied her savings, and stopped eating lunch to afford his meds. But this was the edge. "Is Whitman?" a voice called gently. She looked up to see a man in a charcoal suit, clean-shaven, expensive but forgettable. "I'm Thomas Gray. I represent the Wolf Estate." She blinked. "The Wolf Estate?" "My client wishes to make you an offer." Mara stood slowly, the tension in her spine tighter than her nursing budget. "What kind of offer?" He extended a folder. "A marriage, 1 year, legal, binding. In exchange, Mr. Wolf will pay you $10 million. She laughed, sharp, tired, incredulous. "Excuse me?" "It's real. No intimacy required, just discretion, presence, and legal documentation. You'll live at his estate. Represent him in the public eye." She stared at the folder, her hands refusing to touch it. "Why me?" Gray's voice was smooth. "You were chosen for your record, clean, compassionate, desperate, but honorable." The words cut her deeper than any insult. But he wasn't wrong. "On Elias Wolf?" she asked. "What's wrong with him?" "Paralyzed. Accident 2 years ago. He hasn't spoken publicly since. But legally, he requires a wife for business reasons." Mara scoffed. "So I'm a PR stunt?" "Transaction." 2 days later, with Liam's hospital bill flashing like a guillotine over her head, Mara signed the contract. The Wolf Estate rose like a fortress at the edge of the cliffs. Stone and glass, shadows and silence. The wind howled as Mara stepped from the car, her second-hand heels clicking across marble too expensive for even dreams. The wedding was a room, a table, a pair of pens. Elias Wolf sat in his wheelchair by the window, his back to the sunlight, frame lean and stiff. He didn't turn as she entered. Thomas Gray gestured to the seat beside him. "We'll begin." No vows, no music, no exchange of rings. Just 2 signatures. Mara felt the pen slip in her hand as she wrote her name, watching the ink bind her to a stranger with too many secrets. Elias finally turned. His eyes, pale gray and razor-sharp, met hers. "You'll have your own room," he said. "You'll speak only when spoken to in business settings. And you'll never lie to me." Mara swallowed. "Fine." He studied her for a beat longer, then said slowly, "Loyalty is everything." She nodded. "I can be loyal." He arched a brow. "Loyalty without love is a cold thing." She folded her hands. "Then it's perfect. I don't love anyone." He stared for a second longer, then wheeled away, leaving only the scent of cedar and the echo of everything unspoken. The estate was a kingdom built for silence. Long halls, closed doors, high ceilings that echoed the sound of her own breath. Mara's suite was large, impersonal, like a luxury hotel with no warmth. There were no wedding photos, no flowers, no trace of celebration. Just a contract, framed above the mantel, signed by 2 strangers. The housekeeper, Greta, gave her a tight nod and a schedule. Breakfast at 7, appearances when required. Elias had his own wing, off limits unless summoned. Mara wasn't summoned. 3 days passed. She wandered through the estate like a ghost with a golden leash. Her phone stayed silent, except for hospital updates and Liam's voice notes. He believed she was on a high-paying, private care assignment. She hated lying, but $10 million could save his life. On the fourth day, she found Elias in the library. He was alone, reading a hardcover book. When she stepped inside, his eyes flicked up, unbreakable as always. "You're early," he said. "First public appearance is tomorrow. I assumed you'd want to know your role." She crossed her arms. "And what is that, exactly?" "You'll stand beside me, smile, nod, pretend we've shared something real." "Tea," she said, then hesitated. "You don't talk much." "I don't waste words." Mara leaned against the archway. "Why do you need a wife? Really?" Elias closed the book. "Some boards don't trust a man without roots, and I have enemies who would rather see me fail. A fake marriage fixes that." He met her gaze, piercing. "It slows the vultures." Silence settled again. She shifted. "You don't seem like someone who trusts easily." "Then why me?" Elias studied her a moment longer, then said, "Because your file said you once sold your own car to afford a hospital bed for your brother, and because you didn't ask for more money." Mara's chest tightened. "It's not loyalty, that's survival." He turned his chair slightly. "Sometimes they're the same thing." Later that night, Mara stood at the balcony overlooking the cliffs. The wind tugged at her sweater. Below, the waves crashed with relentless fury. She thought about Elias's words, about how pain made people build walls so high no one dared knock. Back inside, she passed his office and paused. The door was open, just a crack. Through it, she glimpsed him, alone, head bowed, fingers curled into the wheels of his chair. Vulnerable. Still, as if the act of sitting there cost him more than movement ever could. She didn't step in. Didn't knock. Just kept walking. Because this wasn't love. It was a deal. A deal that had just begun. But something told her, this man in the chair, with eyes full of ghosts and words full of warning, would become more dangerous to her heart than anyone she'd ever met. And she had no idea yet how right she was. The mansion's rhythm was one of silence. Each morning, Mara would descend the marble staircase into a world that never changed. Gray skies behind tall windows, immaculate halls that echoed no laughter, meals served with formality and no conversation. Elias remained in his wing most days, and when he did appear, it was like an eclipse, brief, unannounced, and impossible not to notice. He said little, but he watched. Not with menace, just with precision, as if he were constantly solving a problem no one else could see. Mara stuck to her duties. She brewed tea, just the way he liked, 2 drops of honey, never stirred. She made his lunch on a tray Greta delivered. She read in the library, sometimes sitting for hours beneath the towering windows, letting the quiet wrap around her like a weight. She walked the garden paths alone, careful not to intrude on his solitude. But something kept pulling her back toward him. She didn't know when she first noticed the drawings. They weren't on display, just left behind like forgotten thoughts, one tucked between pages of a book on the side table, another peeking from a drawer in the study, all drawn in charcoal, all hauntingly beautiful. Houses. Always houses. But none of them were complete. One afternoon, while returning a book to the library shelf, she spotted him through the cracked door of the west sitting room. Elias was at his desk, hunched slightly forward, charcoal smudging his fingers. The sketch before him was intricate, a 2-story home with wide windows, ivy crawling the facade, and tall chimneys. But the roof was missing. She knocked softly, hesitant. He didn't look up. "You want something?" he asked. She said gently. "I just didn't know you drew." His hands paused. "I don't. Not anymore." Hara took a careful step inside. "This one is beautiful." "It's broken," Elias said quietly. She frowned. "It's unfinished." "Same thing." His tone didn't invite argument, but she couldn't help it. Maybe it's waiting for the right day, the right ending. His jaw twitched. "There's no such thing." That night, she lay awake longer than usual, her thoughts tangled in images of him at that desk. Something about the way he stared at the house, like he was looking for a version of home that never existed. like he didn't believe he'd ever belong in one again. It rained the next evening, a sudden storm, wild and howling. The lights flickered, then went out. She grabbed her flashlight and moved through the dark halls toward the backup generator. But then, her phone buzzed. Elias. Her heart jumped. "Can you come? Now." The message was unlike him. No orders, just urgency. She turned immediately, her feet flying up the stairs and through the corridor toward his wing. For the first time, the door to his study was open without her knocking. He sat there in the dark, his face barely visible in the faint glow from a stormy window. "I didn't expect the outage," he murmured. She approached. "Do you need help getting to your room?" He didn't answer at first, just looked at her, his eyes not cold tonight but quietly shaken. "Storms," he said. "They take me back to the night it happened." Her voice softened. "The accident?" A pause. Then he nodded. Without thinking, Mara knelt beside his chair. "You're safe. It's just a storm." He didn't move. She reached out, resting her hand on his. And for the first time since they met, he didn't pull away. The warmth of her hand surprised him. For a man who had built walls so high, Elias had never anticipated someone reaching over them with nothing but stillness and empathy. Mara didn't press him with questions. She simply stayed. Her fingers were cool, calm, present, answering him to the moment and not the memory that had held him hostage for so long. The thunder rolled again, and for the first time in years, he didn't flinch. "You don't have to explain," she said softly. "Sometimes silence says more than words ever could." Elias looked at her for a long time. His eyes, normally guarded, had a glint of something else, something raw and human. She was beginning to see past the stone exterior, past the rumors and the contracts and the chair. There was a man inside, still trying to believe he was more than what he'd lost. The power returned suddenly, and the room lit up in soft amber. Their hands were still entwined. Elias was the one to pull away this time, but not sharply, just slow, thoughtful. "You should rest," he said, quieter than before. She replied, her voice holding something lighter, almost like hope. She rose, turned to go, but his voice caught her at the doorway. "Mara." She paused. "Atim." She smiled, nodded, and closed the door behind her. The days after that night felt different, subtle but unmistakable. Mara noticed the staff spoke in softer tones. Greta no longer eyed her with skepticism. The head gardener even offered her fresh oranges one morning with a grin. It was as if the house itself had begun to breathe again. Elias started appearing in more rooms, not always talking but present, watching the world instead of hiding from it. He came to breakfast, silent as ever, but when Mara mentioned the new flowers blooming in the garden, he said, "They're late this year." It was the first non-contractual sentence he had spoken to her at a meal. Mara began spending more time in the studio where he used to draw. She cleaned the dust from his old sketchbooks, organizing them with care. One afternoon, she left a new set of charcoal pencils on his desk without a note. The next morning, the pencils had been used. A drawing sat beneath them of the mansion's south garden, perfectly shaded, every detail crisp. Still, no roof. But the gesture said more than words could. That evening, she found him on the terrace at dusk, his blanket draped over his lap, a faint chill in the air. She brought him tea without being asked. "You always remember the honey," he said, taking the cup. "Listen," she replied. He turned to her. Most people just wait to speak. Their eyes met, and in that small exchange something shifted. The house hadn't changed. The silence still hung between walls too tall and windows too wide. But now there were moments, glances, pauses, the brushing of fingers when handing over a cup, where Mara no longer felt like a stranger in someone else's life. One night she passed by the studio and saw him there again, sketching quietly, his brow furrowed in concentration. This time, she didn't knock. She just stood in the doorway and smiled. He didn't send her away. Instead, he looked at her, then at the drawing before him. This one was new, a small cottage in the woods, warm light glowing from the windows, and this time, a roof. Complete. She didn't speak, but she knew. Something was growing between them, slow, careful, like the first fragile shoots breaking through winter ground. And neither of them dared to name it yet. But it was there. Wait. It started with the smallest things, little changes in how Elias spoke, moved, and looked at her. Mara noticed how he began sitting outside more often, taking in the breeze as she watered the herbs along the windowsill. He watched her with quiet focus, not the way someone supervised as a stranger, but as if he was trying to memorize the way she existed in his space. And in time, it no longer felt like his space. It began to feel like theirs. One morning, Mara brought him breakfast. She'd attempted to make toast, but the power settings on the estate's antique toaster betrayed her. The bread was charred around the edges, still soft in the middle. She winced. "Sorry, I swear it was golden a second ago." Elias surprised her with a chuckle. "It looks like a roofing tile." "I should probably stick to nursing," she sighed. He took a bite anyway, crispy but tolerable. It wasn't much, but the shared laughter that followed filled the silence in a new way, a warm kind of ease, and it stayed with her long after she left the room. Later that week, Mara found herself in the studio, curious about the sketch he'd been working on. Elias wasn't inside, but the piece sat open on the table. It was a detailed sketch of a woman in a sunlit kitchen, sleeves rolled up, laughing at something off-page. Her heart stuttered. It was her. The curve of the smile, the way her hair curled near her ear. It was her, seen through his eyes, and that truth hit harder than she expected. He'd noticed her. Not as a nurse, not as an obligation, but as something more. When she turned, Elias was there in the doorway. She began. But he held up a hand. "You were meant to see it," he said. She stepped closer. "It's beautiful." He nodded, but his eyes were cautious now. "You asked once why I stopped drawing. The truth is, I didn't want to remember." She waited. The accident wasn't just physical. The woman I loved, she left me in that hospital bed, said she couldn't handle the chair, couldn't love a broken man. Mara's stomach turned. "He built this house for her," he added, his voice low. "Every corner, every beam. It was going to be our future, but when I couldn't walk, she walked away." "Sorry," Mara whispered. He looked out the window, his voice distant. "It taught me something. That love has conditions, that loyalty is rare." She stepped beside him, unsure what to say, but needing to say something. "Not everyone leaves, Elias." He turned to her. "Have you?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "No, I stay, even when it's hard." He looked down at her, studying her face as if searching for a lie and not finding one. And then, in a voice quieter than a breath, "Why?" She met his eyes. "Because I know what it's like to be left behind. My dad left when I was little, my mom got sick, and I had to grow up fast to take care of my brother. I stayed for him. I still do." Silence passed between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable anymore. "You and I," Elias said softly, "we were both abandoned at our most broken." Mara nodded, eyes misting. "Maybe that's why we understand each other." He gave her a look she couldn't quite decipher, something between admiration and fear. "Understanding is one thing," he said. "Trust is another." And Mara didn't have an answer for that yet. But her heart was answering in other ways. That night, everything changed. That night, sleep evaded Mara. The rain had returned, tapping against the wide estate windows like a soft drumbeat of something unfinished. She wandered into the main room to find Elias sketching again, the fireplace casting golden shadows across his sharp profile. He didn't notice her at first. His hand moved with ease, almost reverence, across the page. When she finally stepped forward, he paused, but didn't close the sketchbook this time. "I couldn't sleep," Mara said softly. "Me neither." She moved beside him, her eyes drawn to the paper. It was her again, this time standing in a sunlit garden. There were roses behind her and a gentle breeze woven into the pencil strokes. The drawing wasn't perfect, but it was filled with feeling. With something raw. He noticed her expression. "You inspire my hands before my mind can catch up," he said. She turned to him. Her heart was louder now, every beat a confession. "Elias," she began, but he looked at her then, eyes unreadable, mouth a tight line. She bent slowly, hesitating just inches from his face. He didn't pull back, but when she finally leaned in, when her lips brushed his softly, he stopped her. He whispered. Accused, she drew back. "I'm sorry, I thought—" He shook his head. "Not unless it's real." Mara blinked, unsure if she'd heard correctly. His voice trembled slightly. "Not if it's pity, or gratitude, or obligation. I've lived with all those, and I won't confuse them with love." She stared at him, her heart ached, not from rejection, but from how deeply he meant every word. "It's not pity," she whispered. "And what is it?" "I don't know yet," she confessed honestly. "But it's not fake." His hand found hers on the armrest, unsure, but it lingered there. "Wouldn't you?" he said. "I really do." She sat beside him quietly, not pushing, not withdrawing. Just there, and for once, that was enough. The next few days were different. They spoke more, laughed more. She brought him breakfast without burning it, and he smiled without shielding himself. And every time their fingers brushed, a glass passed, a page turned, it felt intentional, like the slow formation of something unspoken but sacred. One morning, Mara found a wrapped package on her nightstand. Inside was a sketchbook. A note read, "Draw what peace looks like, Elias." She blinked through tears. She hadn't drawn in years, but something inside her wanted to try, because of him. By evening, she brought it back. On the first page, a simple charcoal sketch of a man in a chair, with a woman sitting beside him holding his hand. When Elias saw it, he didn't speak. He just reached for her fingers and pressed them to his lips. And that was the first kiss. Not one of romance or desire, but of reverence, of something fragile and deeply real. Mara didn't know where this would lead. The contract still hung over them like a silent countdown. But for the first time, it wasn't about rules or terms or obligation. It was about two people, flawed, bruised, and still healing, who found something they hadn't believed in for a long time. Possibility. And even though he hadn't said the words, and she hadn't fully accepted them yet, one truth rang clear. Elias Wolf was no longer just the man in the chair. He was the man who saw her when the world looked away. And that changed everything. Mara noticed it first during breakfast. Elias reached for his coffee, and his hand didn't tremble like it used to. His wrist bent at a stronger angle. His back, usually stiff and braced, seemed looser. She watched silently as he adjusted the napkin on his lap without help. Something inside her stirred. Later that afternoon, as she organized supplies in the sunroom, she saw him in the distance, alone in the gym across the courtyard. Through the wide glass windows, she could barely make out his form, but then it hit her. He was lifting weights. Her breath caught. Not a therapist in sight, not even an assistant. He was seated, yes, but his arms moved with practiced rhythm. His shoulders were firm, determined. She didn't mean to barge in, but her feet moved faster than her thoughts. Elias? He froze mid-rep, caught in the quiet of the private gym. Their eyes met across the room, and something cracked in both of them. You're not as paralyzed as you said." He slowly placed the weight down, his breathing uneven. "True." She walked forward. "Why?" He didn't flinch. "Because trust isn't something you buy, it's something you build. And I couldn't risk faking it again." She stared at him, disbelief and confusion swirling. "So, what? You've been hiding your recovery?" "Yes," he said quietly. "I've been in therapy for months, alone, secretly. I had to know if you were here for the contract or something else." Her heart pounded. "You lied to me." "I protected myself," Elias replied. People don't see me when I stand. They see what they want to manipulate. My chair was the one thing that made them hesitate. Mara folded her arms, trembling. You thought I was like the rest? Too early, a daily hope conception. Jess and I's wind helped us that day. I needed to be sure. She looked at him. Really looked, past the cold exterior, past the secrets. He was trying to protect something wounded, and in doing so, he had nearly lost her trust. Hire for a living. I can give you an out, Elias said. You can walk away. I'll honor the contract, every cent. No judgment. She stepped forward slowly. Not leaving. His brows lifted, surprised. But now, proceed, to say this freely, with her core sign language sounding every now and then. I'm staying because, somehow, in all this cold and silence, I started feeling more alive beside you than I have in years. His eyes glistened, and he reached for her hand. She met him halfway. Her fingers clasped, and it was no longer cautious or accidental. It was real. When he pulled her down gently into his lap, it wasn't calculated. When her lips found his, it wasn't rehearsed. Their kiss was slow, lingering, the kind that speaks years into the future and aches from the weight of things unsaid. He held her like he was afraid she'd disappear, and she held him like she was finally allowed to fall. For the first time, there were no conditions, no negotiations, no masks. Just Elias, just Mara. The storm outside the windows blurred the world around them, but inside, something steady had begun. Later that night, wrapped in a blanket by the fire, she rested her head against his chest. I wish I'd known sooner, she murmured. I wish I'd trusted you sooner, he whispered. They didn't say more. Words weren't needed. But the next morning, the world intruded. Mara opened the door to retrieve a tray of breakfast and found his lawyer, Mr. Hamilton, waiting in the hallway with a tight smile. You're not the only one with secrets, Mrs. Wolfe, he said coolly. Mara's breath hitched. What are you talking about? His eyes flickered with something unreadable. Just remember, the past always comes to collect. Mara shut the door slowly, her hands trembling as the echo of the lawyer's words lingered. You're not the only one with secrets. The tray in her hands felt suddenly too heavy. She walked it to the sitting area, setting it down with more force than intended. Elias looked up from the paper in his lap, immediately catching her expression. What happened? She tried to steady her voice. Your lawyer. He was waiting in the hall. He said something strange. Elias narrowed his eyes. What exactly did he say? Beeping. I'm not the only one with secrets that the past comes to collect. He exhaled, setting the paper aside. That sounds like Hamilton. Mara stepped closer. Is he threatening me? He said after a pause. But he's suspicious of everyone. Are you sure? He asked, heart pounding. Is there something else I should know? Elias hesitated, just for a moment, but it was long enough for the weight of uncertainty to flood the room again. Eliza, don't know what he's talking about, he said finally. But I'll find out. Mara nodded slowly, though unease still pulsed through her veins. Later that afternoon, while Elias took a call, Mara wandered to his office. Something about Hamilton's tone refused to leave her alone. On a whim, she checked the locked cabinet Elias once said held boring financial files. It was open. Inside, folders were lined like soldiers. She wasn't sure what she was looking for until she found one labeled Mara L. Holloway. Her blood ran cold. She opened it. Inside were old newspaper clippings, medical reports, debt records, everything. Even the hospital bill from her brother's accident, her mother's obituary, the eviction notice from 2 years ago. He had known everything from the beginning. When she returned to the sitting room, Elias saw it in her face. You knew who I was before the contract, she said flatly. He stood up, not from the chair, but using the braces that had become more familiar to her now. Yes. Mara's eyes burned. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I needed someone real," he said quietly. "Not someone coached or sent by someone else. I had you investigated to be sure you weren't tied to anyone trying to harm me." Her fists clenched. "So this whole thing was a test?" "First," Elias admitted. "But then, you were just you, and I didn't know how to undo what I'd done." She turned her back, blinking against tears. "He shared everything with you," she whispered. "Even when I didn't want to, even when I was afraid." "No," Elias said gently. "And I was falling for you before I even realized it." Mara turned, pain and disbelief clashing in her eyes. "This is what your lawyer meant, isn't it? That I was never truly chosen, just selected." Elias said firmly, "You were never a selection. You were the first person in years who made me feel human again." "You didn't trust me," she said. He stepped closer. "I didn't trust anyone until you." Mara stared at him, into him, and saw the truth. It didn't erase the pain, but it softened the edges. She took a shaky breath. "I don't know what this means now." It means," Elias said, "that everything starts over. No contracts, no conditions, just choice." She didn't respond, not yet. Instead, she sat beside him again, this time not as an employee, not as a transaction. As someone whose heart had just begun to feel seen. In the silence, a new shadow loomed, not of deceit, but of the future. And neither of them could yet tell if it would hold light or more secrets. The storm had passed, but the air in the estate still felt heavy. Mara stood in the hallway outside Elias's study, unsure of what had drawn her there again. Maybe it was instinct, or maybe it was the ache in her chest that wouldn't fade. She glanced toward the shelves, the quiet stack of books, the soft flicker of a lamp. And then her eyes landed on something new, a photo frame turned face down on the edge of the desk. Curiosity overruled hesitation. She flipped it over. The photograph was old, clearly taken before Elias' accident. His hair was longer, his posture confident, and beside him stood a woman with striking hazel eyes and a laugh caught mid-mention. They were standing in a sunlit field, arms around each other, joy written across their faces. The woman was the same one from the sketch, the one Elias had drawn long before he ever drew Mara. A name surfaced in Mara's memory. Celeste? Her throat tightened. The photo back where she found it and turned toward the filing cabinet, where Elias had once kept mementos he never spoke of. She wasn't proud of the impulse, but something told her this silence had roots. The second drawer clicked open, and inside, under old architectural drafts, was a worn envelope, no stamp, no address. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded the letter. "Elias? If you're reading this, it means I've gone. I can't stay. Not like this. I loved you, but your world turned to walls after the accident, and I don't know how to be someone who waits outside doors that never open again. I know you think I abandoned you. I didn't. I was scared, and maybe selfish, but before I left, I tried to do something right. There's a woman, a nurse, her name is Mara Holloway. She applied for a position through the Care Network, but I pulled strings. I submitted her name to your lawyer myself. You need someone who sees past your chair. I think she might. Forgive me someday." Mara's heart stopped. Celeste had sent her. She stumbled back a step, then another. Her entire body felt numb. Had she ever stood a chance? Or was she just the echo of a woman who'd come before? By the time Elias found her, she was standing in the hallway with the letter clenched in her hand. He didn't have to ask what it was. "I knew," she whispered. Elias's expression changed in an instant, from curiosity to dread. He said, voice cracking, "I didn't. Not until now." "Chose me for you," Mara said, her voice shaking, "and you let me believe it was all random, that it was just neat." "I swear to you," he said, stepping forward, "I had no idea. Hamilton handled everything. I never knew about the letter, until now." She looked at him like a stranger. "But you drew her. You loved her." Elias agreed. "But she left. And you stayed?" Silence. He took a trembling breath. Now I know the truth, and I still choose you. Not because Celeste wanted me to, not because of anything she did. I choose you because you saw me when no one else did." Mara blinked, but her vision blurred. "You should have told me sooner." With that, she turned and walked away, each step quieter than the last. And Elias stood still, the letter in his hands, as the sound of her retreat echoed through a house that had always been too quiet. Now lonelier than ever. The next few days passed in a blur of silence. Elias remained in his study, the letter from Celeste lying untouched beside his sketches. He couldn't bring himself to look at it again, not after the look in Mara's eyes when she left, not after the quiet click of the front door that didn't swing open again. He had thought pain came in sharp bursts, like the accident, the betrayal, the loss of motion in his legs. But this was different. It was dull, persistent, like a wound that refused to close because it still needed answers. Mara, meanwhile, packed her things quietly. The guest room, her room, had always felt temporary. Now it felt like it had never belonged to her at all. She folded her clothes, placed her stethoscope carefully into her bag, and stared at the one charcoal sketch Elias had gifted her weeks ago, a silhouette of her looking out a rain-soaked window. She almost left it behind. But something made her hold on. That night, Mara returned to the apartment she had shared with her brother before his condition worsened. It was small, crowded with medical bills, and filled with a quiet that rang even louder than the estate's hollow halls. Camilla called. "He's been asking for you." "Time?" Mara replied. "Then, take it. But don't take too long," Camilla warned gently. "He's not the man you think he was when this began." Mara lay awake, staring at the ceiling, heart tangled in a storm of emotions. Was she angry, betrayed, or just scared that she had let herself believe too deeply, too soon? The next morning, she went for a walk past the coffee shop they once visited, the bookstore he had recommended. Every corner of the city held traces of him. When she passed by an art gallery window, her steps faltered. A new exhibit was opening, Structures of the Heart, Elias Wolf. Through the glass, she saw it. His sketches, raw and vulnerable. One drawing, larger than the rest, caught her breath. It was her. Not as a substitute, not as a shadow. Her smile. Her hands painting, her head tilted as she once did while reading. The title of the piece, The One Who Stayed. She stepped back, her throat tightening. Back at the estate, Elias stood with Hamilton, facing another reality. Legal contracts, dissolution of the marriage agreement. Hamilton paused. "Are you sure?" "Nobody sleeps here," Elias said quietly. "But I won't keep her here out of duty, not again." Suddenly, the front doors creaked open. "Mara?" She stepped in slowly, holding the charcoal sketch he once gave her. "It drew me," she said softly. "Why did you leave?" Elias whispered, stunned. "And not because you reminded me of anyone, because for the first time in a long time, someone saw me." Mara held out the sketch. "Kept this, even when I wanted to forget." He moved toward her, hands shaking. "Mara, if I could rewrite everything." "You can't," she interrupted. "But you didn't lie to me, not really. You just didn't know." He nodded, unsure if he had the right to hope. "We still don't know what this is," she said, "or what we are. But I know I wasn't just a replacement. You never were, together." She let out a breath she'd been holding for days. "Then maybe we start again. Contracts. No past ghosts." He smiled, small, unsure, but real. "Just you and me." Mara stepped forward, eyes shining. "This time," she whispered, "I choose it too." In that moment, neither of them knew what came next, but for the first time in weeks, the silence between them didn't ache. It held promise. The hospital waiting room buzzed with soft footsteps and distant beeps. Mara sat beside her brother's bed, clutching his hand. His face looked pale, but his spirit hadn't dulled. He cracked a smile when he saw her. "Feeling tired," he said hoarsely. She chuckled, brushing hair from her face. You're not exactly a spa trip, you know." He squeezed her fingers gently, "But worth the visit." They shared a quiet moment. Then he looked at her with a seriousness that pierced through the layers of everything she'd been trying to ignore. "You left him." Mara nodded, eyes drifting to the floor. "I thought I was a replacement, for someone he couldn't forget." "Are you?" he asked. "I don't think so, but knowing that someone else sent my name, it broke something in me." Her brother gave a tired sigh. "Mara, you've spent your whole life sacrificing for others, even marrying a stranger to pay my bills. But for once, maybe do something because it makes you feel alive." She didn't respond. He squeezed her hand again. "If he makes you feel safe, like you belong, go back." Mara's throat tightened. "But what if I get hurt?" "Then get hurt for something that matters." She kissed his forehead before leaving, his words echoing in her mind. The snow had started to fall by the time she stepped outside. Tiny flakes caught in her lashes as she stood still, letting the cold ground her. Across town, at the Wolf Foundation's winter gala, a different kind of storm was settling. Hundreds gathered in the grand ballroom. Dignitaries, donors, business elites, all waiting for the night's keynote speaker, Elias Wolf. He hadn't appeared in public in months. Rumors had circled. Some said he was bedridden, others claimed he'd left the business world for good. But none were prepared for what came next. The music dimmed, a spotlight beamed toward the stage. And then, Elias walked out. Not wheeled, not carried. The silence cracked into applause. Murmurs rippled through the crowd like a wave. Cameras flashed. But Elias didn't smile. His face was calm, composed, his posture straight. He wore a black suit, no tie, his cane in one hand, not as a necessity, but as a reminder of what he had endured. When he reached the podium, the room held its breath. "For a long time," he began, voice deep and measured, "I believed I was broken, that because I couldn't stand, I couldn't lead. Because I couldn't move, I couldn't build. But what I learned is that strength doesn't begin in the legs." He paused, scanning the crowd. "It begins in the heart, in the moments no one sees, when you choose to keep going, after loss, betrayal, shame, when you trust again, even after every reason not to." Hush fell over the room. "Rebirth," he said slowly, "isn't dramatic, it's quiet. It's choosing to believe in something after you stopped believing in yourself." Off to the side, near the entrance, Mara stood, frozen. She hadn't planned on attending, but she had come, maybe out of curiosity, maybe out of something deeper. And now, watching him, standing, speaking, alive in every sense, her breath caught. Elias spotted her across the crowd. The next line in his speech faded from his lips. He stepped back from the podium and walked toward her. The room murmured in confusion. But for Elias, the rest of the world had disappeared. Mara stood beneath the archway of the ballroom, her coat still dusted with snowflakes. She didn't move, didn't speak. Her eyes met his, and in that single look, the noise of the crowd vanished. Elias reached her, breath steady despite the pounding in his chest. For a man who had spent years hiding in shadows, this moment felt like stepping into the light for the first time. "You came," he said softly. Mara's voice cracked. "I almost didn't." He nodded. "I wouldn't have blamed you if you didn't." "I saw you speak," she said, eyes welling. "You weren't just standing. You were free?" He studied her. "Freedom doesn't mean much without the person who helped you earn it." She looked down. "You waited?" "I'm no longer in the chair," Elias whispered, "but I'm still the man who waited for you every day, who watched the door hoping you'd walk through it." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "And I'm no longer the woman who married for money," she whispered back. "I thought I was just another contract, but then you started sketching me, talking to me, looking at me like I mattered." Elias stepped closer. "You were never just anything, Mara, not to me. Maybe at first I didn't know who you were, but I saw you, and I couldn't unsee you." She shook her head, trying to stay composed. "Why didn't you fight harder when I left?" was waiting to be someone who deserved to stand beside you. Her chest shuddered with quiet sobs. You already were. I just couldn't see it back then. The crowd behind them remained hushed, many assuming they were watching a grand romantic reunion staged for effect. But for Mara and Elias, it was deeply, achingly real. A snowflake caught on his lashes. She reached out and brushed it away with trembling fingers. Then her hand stayed on his cheek, warm against the cold. They stood like that for a moment, heartbeat sinking, past pain unraveling. She don't know what happens next, she said. We start again, Elias replied. But this time, no contracts, no lies, just us. If I get scared again, then I'll wait, as long as it takes. She smiled through her tears. What about your speech? He glanced back toward the stage. They can wait. They laughed quietly. Elias reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. No box, no grand gesture. A folded piece of charcoal-stained paper. He handed it to her. Mara unfolded it slowly. It was a sketch. A home? Not just any home, but the one he'd drawn before, now with a roof. And in the window, two figures. One in a chair, one standing beside him, hand in hand. I couldn't finish it, he said, until I believed we could build something real. Mara stared at the drawing, heart full and breaking all at once. She nodded slowly. Then, without hesitation, she stepped into his arms. The crowd clapped politely, still believing this was about charity and strength. But for Elias and Mara, this was the moment where all the broken pieces found their place. Where silence gave way to music, pain gave way to healing, and fear gave way to the kind of love you only earn when you've been to the edge and chosen to return. They held each other in the snowfall, two souls no longer running, no longer pretending. Just rising. Together. The new wing of the estate overlooked the gardens Elias had once abandoned. Where brambles had overgrown stone paths and fountains had run dry, flowers now bloomed in full color. In the center of it all stood Mara's new studio, an airy space made of glass and timber, sunlight streaming in like hope returning after a long storm. She stepped inside for the first time, eyes wide with wonder. It smelled like fresh paint and cedar. Her easel waited in the corner, next to shelves of charcoal, oil, and ink. A wall of tall windows opened onto a view of lavender rose and the lake beyond. There was even a small chair tucked beside the firewood pile, her reading nook, built just for her. Mara turned to Elias, speechless. He stood a few feet behind her, no cane, no chair. I didn't know what to give someone who gave me back my life, he said quietly. So I thought I'd give you space to build your own. She walked over slowly, placing her hand on his chest. You built this for me. I built it with you in mind, he replied. Every inch of it. They stood in silence, the kind that felt full instead of empty. Later that week, they launched a new initiative together, a trust fund supporting women like Mara, caregivers, sisters, daughters who had sacrificed their dreams for someone else's survival. The fund would help them with education, housing, therapy, and second chances. At the press conference, Mara spoke for the first time in public. I thought my story was ordinary, she said into the microphone, but I've learned that ordinary women often carry the heaviest burdens. This is for them. When they returned to the estate that night, Elias poured 2 glasses of wine and sat with her beneath the garden lights. Fireflies blinked softly in the lavender, and the stars above shimmered as if listening in. There's something I need to tell you, he said. She turned to him, gently alert. To you, he said. Not about everything, but about the beginning. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a thin file. Her file. He read this before the wedding. I asked my lawyer for every applicant who had medical debt. I chose you before I even met you. Mara stared at the folder. I wanted to believe that someone might choose me even like that.